My name is Margaret Harmon. Most people call me Peggy. I am 75 years old, and I built this house. Not as a figure of speech. In 1984, when I was 34 years old, I bought the lot on Birchwood Lane in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And over the next 3 years, I paid every contractor, every plumber, every electrician who set foot on this property. I paid them in person, most of the time, counting the bills out on the hood of a truck or across a kitchen counter that did not yet have cabinets above it. My late husband Gerald helped lay the subflooring in the living room. We did that ourselves on a Saturday in October. The plywood was cold under our knees, and the air smelled like cut pine and the coffee going stale in the thermos. My hands smelled like sawdust for a week. And I wrote every single expense in a spiral notebook that still sits in my kitchen drawer, the cover soft as cloth now from 41 years of being opened. 41 years later, my son Michael stood at the head of my dining room table on Thanksgiving and told the family I needed a solution. His wife Diane had set 12 place cards around that table. 12. I counted them from the doorway, the way I count everything. There was not one for me. She said, "We thought you'd be more comfortable in the kitchen, Peggy." She said it like she was doing me a favor. She said it with a little tilt of her head, the way you speak to a child who has wandered too close to the stove. What none of them knew, what Michael had not told a single person in that room, was that 8 months before that Thursday, I had walked into my attorney's office and signed paperwork. Quietly, carefully, the way I do everything. I have never in my life raised my voice to get what I wanted. I have found that the people who are busy being loud rarely notice the person who is busy being thorough. There was a gray folder on the table. Leonard Marsh brought it with him. He had been waiting in Gerald's old study for 40 minutes before anyone thought to look, sitting in the dark with his coat still on, because that is the kind of man he is. I want you to stay right here with me. Comment below if your family has ever made you feel invisible in a home you built yourself. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was 34 years old in 1984, and I had a plan. Gerald and I had saved for 6 years, a little from his paycheck driving freight, a little from mine keeping the books at Hendricks and Moore. We were not rich. We were not close to it. Some months we put away $19 and called it a victory. But over 6 years, we had $28,000 for a down payment, and enough left over for the framing. I remember sitting at the kitchen table of our apartment, the radiator clanking, and writing down every number twice, the way my father taught me, until they all agreed with each other. He used to say a number you only wrote once was a number you were lying to yourself about. That was the year Michael was born. We broke ground when he was 8 months old. I have a photograph of Gerald holding Michael on his hip at the edge of a muddy foundation, both of them squinting into the sun. Gerald used to say the house was our third child. He meant it as a compliment. We poured ourselves into it. We learned it the way you learn a person, where it creaked, where it held the heat, where the morning light came through. When the furnace failed in the cold snap of 1991, I worked overtime for 4 months at Hendricks and Moore to pay for the replacement, balancing other people's ledgers by day so I could keep my own family warm. When the roof needed resheathing in 2002, I did the same. I never financed a repair I could earn my way out of. I kept every receipt in that spiral notebook. Every single one. The furnace, the roof, the new water heater in 2010, the gutters, the box of finishing nails. 41 years of receipts, in pencil, in the same slanted hand my father taught me. I have a habit. Every night before I go to sleep, I walk to the back door, check the lock, check the window latch above the kitchen sink, check the side door in the mudroom. Then I go to bed. I have done it every night since 1984. It takes me perhaps 90 seconds. I could do it with my eyes shut. And on the worst nights, the ones after Gerald passed, I nearly did. Gerald used to tease me about it. He said I checked the doors like I was afraid someone would walk in and take everything. I always told him it was just habit. I never told him I was afraid he was right. I never told him that some part of me had always known the danger does not always come through the door as a stranger. Sometimes it comes through as family, with a key you gave it yourself. Michael started coming around more about 2 years ago. He and Diane would arrive on a Sunday afternoon, walk through the rooms slowly, the way people walk through a house they are measuring, and Michael would say, very gently, "Mom, this place is a lot for one person. The yard, the maintenance, it's just a lot." He had a way of saying things that sounded kind. He had learned that from Diane. She was better at the tone than he was, but they had both practiced. I would watch Diane's eyes move along the crown molding, along the built-in bookcases Gerald and I had stained one summer, and I knew she was not admiring them. She was appraising them. There is a difference, and I have spent my whole life learning to see it. He used to take the spare key with him when he left. He would say he needed it in case of emergency. I let him think I did not notice. I had 3 more keys he did not know about, and a deadbolt he had never once tried, and a habit older than he was of checking every lock before bed. Let him carry the key. A key only opens a door. It does not open the things I had already closed. My youngest grandchild, Tyler, came every Thursday. He would knock on the back door, always knocked, never used a key, and sit with me in the sunroom with a cup of coffee and ask me to tell him things about the house, about his grandfather, about the early years. He liked the way the late sun came through the sunroom windows in the afternoon and laid itself across the floorboards. He asked to see the photo albums once, and we spent 3 hours going through them, his coffee going cold in his hand because he kept forgetting to drink it. He never asked what the house was worth. Not once. In 41 years of people coming through that door, contractors, neighbors, in-laws, a son with a key in his pocket, Tyler is the only person who never once asked what anything was worth. I know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who is keeping an inventory. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen when I noticed a folded paper on the edge of the counter near the fruit bowl. It was not mine. Nothing in my kitchen is ever in a place I did not put it. That is how I knew, before I even touched it. The letterhead was from a law office in Des Moines. Not Leonard's office, a different one. It was a consultation summary. The words transfer of property, owner incapacity were in the second paragraph. I read that phrase 3 times. Owner incapacity. Below that, a note in Diane's handwriting. Appointment November 29th, after the holiday. Don't leave this out. She had tucked it under a dish towel. I found it because I was moving the towel to wipe the counter, the way I do every evening at the same hour. I read it twice. My heart did not race. I want to be honest about that, because people expect a moment like this to feel like lightning, and it did not. It felt like the click of a number falling into its column. Then I folded the paper back exactly the way it had been folded. Exactly. The same crease, the same angle, the same corner tucked under. I put it back where I found it, and I finished wiping the counter, and I rinsed the cloth, and I hung it on the oven door to dry. Because a woman who has already decided what she is going to do does not need to make a sound. If you have ever found something you were not supposed to find, and you had to decide in that moment whether to react or to wait, if you know what that feels like, I want you to comment below. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. 2 days later, I heard Michael on the phone in the guest room. He had closed the door, but sound travels in this house. I know every inch of it. I know the warm air register in the guest room carries a voice straight down into the hallway, as clean as a telephone line, because Gerald and I argued through that register more than once, 50 years ago, when we still thought we needed to hide things from each other. I was standing in the hallway with my afternoon tea, the cup warm in both hands, and I heard Michael say, very quietly but clearly, "We present it as a solution. We're all in agreement, so she won't have a choice. The conservatorship petition covers the property. We file it Monday after the holiday." There was a pause. Then, "She won't fight it. She doesn't understand what it means." She doesn't understand what it means. I stood in that hallway and let the tea go lukewarm in my hands. 41 years of receipts, written down twice. 41 years of a ledger that always agreed with itself. And my own son believed I did not understand what it means. Then I went back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and looked at that spiral notebook sitting in the drawer where it has always been. I did not feel anger exactly. I felt the quiet, settled certainty of someone who had counted the room and found that the numbers were already on her side. I had already called Leonard Marsh. I had called him the morning after I found the paper. He already knew this day might come. He had said so 8 months ago when I had first sat down in his office and told him what I was worried about. Let me tell you about that April morning. I had driven myself to Leonard's office, the same office on College Street where Gerald and I had done our original will back in 1997. The radiators there still tick the same way. Leonard had taken over the practice from his father. He is 57 years old, calm in the way that only a man who has seen a great deal of human nature can be calm. He poured me coffee in a real cup, not a paper one, and he did not rush me. I told him what I had been observing, the slow walkthroughs, the questions about what happens to the house that were always framed as concern, Diane's eyes on the crown molding, the spare key in Michael's pocket. I told him I was not confused and I was not frightened, but I wanted to be protected. I told him I had spent my whole life making numbers agree with each other, and I wanted my own affairs to agree too, before anyone could come along and pretend they did not. We spent 2 hours that morning. He explained the mechanics precisely, the way I liked, like a ledger, everything in its column. We updated my will so that the house, appraised at $385,000 that spring, would pass to Tyler with a life estate reserved for me. That meant the house was Tyler's on paper, but remained mine to live in for the rest of my life. No one could transfer it without my consent. No one could sell it out from under me. No one could move me out of it. No one could decide on my behalf that I would be more comfortable somewhere else. We also executed a quitclaim deed, recording Tyler as the remainder beneficiary with the county clerk. It went into the public record that same week, where anyone willing to look could have found it. Diane never thought to look. People who are certain you do not understand things rarely bother to check what you have already done. And then Leonard said, if anyone tries to petition for a conservatorship over the property, there is no property for them to control. You have already disposed of it as you saw fit, as is your right. He said it very simply, like arithmetic, like a column that balances. I wrote the date in my spiral notebook that evening, at the kitchen table, in pencil, in my father's slanted hand. April 14th, 2025. Next to it, I wrote, deed recorded, will updated, everything in order. And then, the way I have always done, I wrote it a second time underneath, so I would know it was true. I told Leonard to keep the gray folder ready. The months between April and Thanksgiving, I let Michael believe he was managing things. He would call and ask how I was feeling, whether I was keeping up with the house, whether I had thought more about options. I told him I was fine. I told him everything was the same. It was not a lie, exactly. Everything was the same. The locks still checked at night, the notebook still in the drawer, the maples still turning in the yard. It was just that some things had already been decided, and a thing that is decided does not feel any different from the outside. That is the mercy of doing your paperwork quietly. You get to watch people make their plans around a wall they cannot see. Tyler came to the house one October Thursday, about a month before Thanksgiving. I made coffee, and I told him to sit down, and I walked him through what Leonard and I had done, the will, the life estate, the deed in his name. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, the way he listens to everything, leaning forward a little with his elbows on his knees. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Grandma, I never wanted the house. I want you to stay in it." I said, "I know. That is why it is yours on paper." I told him that putting his name on the deed was not a gift to him. It was a lock on a door, and he was the only person I trusted to hold the key and never once think about turning it. We sat on the sunroom steps for a while after that. The maple in the backyard was at full color, the kind of red that looks lit from inside. Tyler is the kind of person who notices things like that. He did not say anything else about the will. He asked me about the maple instead, when Gerald and I had planted it. I told him 1987, the same year we finally finished the house. He nodded like that was important information to him, like he was filing it away somewhere, safe. That is the difference, you see. One man wanted to know what the house was worth. This boy wanted to know when we planted the tree. The gray folder was in the cabinet in Gerald's old study, the one Michael never opened because it still had Gerald's name on the label, in Gerald's own handwriting. And even Michael had the decency, or the discomfort, to leave his dead father's cabinet alone. Thanksgiving morning, Diane arrived first. She had brought tablecloths and extra serving dishes, and she moved through my kitchen with the ease of a woman who had decided it was already hers. She opened my drawers without asking. She knew which one held the serving spoons, and somehow that was worse than if she hadn't. She put place cards around the table, handwritten, in good ink, and I counted them from the doorway. 12. Michael, Diane, Karen, Karen's husband Bill, Robert, Robert's wife Linda, their 3 kids, Tyler, and little Emma, Tyler's 6-year-old cousin. 12 names. 12 places. Not mine. I had cooked the sweet potatoes and the green bean casserole myself, the way I do every year. I had set the kitchen timer at 6:15 that morning, the same as always, the little dial worn smooth where my thumb has turned it for decades. And then I stood in the doorway of my own dining room and looked at a table set in my house without a seat for the woman who built it. The smell of roasting turkey filled every room, the way it has every 4th Thursday of November for 41 years. The windows had gone soft with steam. Diane had a glass of wine in her hand before noon, and she was laughing at something. Comfortable. Certain. She had no idea she was standing inside a decision that had been made in April. When the family had gathered and dinner was almost on the table, Diane said it with a smile. "Peggy, we thought you'd be more comfortable eating in the kitchen. It's closer to the food, right?" Michael nodded along. He was already seated at the head of the table, my chair, the one with the arms worn pale where my hands have rested through 41 years of Thanksgivings, the one Gerald used to call the captain's chair. I looked at the 12 place settings, the good china I had bought at a White Owl sale in 1988, piece by piece, because we could not afford the whole set at once. The silverware Gerald and I had gotten as a wedding gift, still kept in its felt-lined box the rest of the year. The long linen tablecloth I had pressed that morning at 7 o'clock, the iron hissing in the quiet kitchen while the rest of the house slept. 41 years of Thanksgivings at that table. A place card for every one of them. And none for me. Have you ever been forgotten at a table you built yourself? Have you ever stood in a room full of people who were using everything you made, your plates, your silver, your tablecloth, your house, and felt completely alone? If that has ever happened to you, you already know what the next few minutes of silence feel like. I did not go to the kitchen. I went to the mud room, past the side door I check every night, and I retrieved the old wooden step stool I keep there for reaching the high shelves. I carried it back to the dining room. It is not heavy, but my hands knew its weight, the way they know everything in this house, and I set it at the far end of the table, the foot, across from my chair, where Michael was sitting. I sat down on that stool. The seat put me a few inches lower than everyone else, so that I had to look up slightly to see their faces. I did not mind. I have done my best thinking from the lower chair. People say a great deal when they believe they are looking down at you. I said, if there is no room for me, I will make my own. Michael frowned. Diane glanced at him. A quick look, the look of 2 people checking whether the plan was still holding. Karen looked at her plate. Robert looked at the window. Tyler looked at me and said nothing. But I saw what was in his face. and it steadied me more than any words could have. I picked up my fork, the wedding silver, cool in my hand, and I said, very quietly, "Before anyone serves themselves, Michael, did you want to tell the family about your plans, the ones you have been working on?" I looked at him the way I used to look at a column of numbers that did not balance. Not angry, just steady, just waiting for the figure that was out of place to show itself. Michael set down his wine glass. He straightened in his chair, my chair, and he said, "Actually, yes, since we're all here." He looked around the table. He had rehearsed this. I could hear it in the rhythm of it, the same rhythm I had heard through the register. "Mom, we've been worried about you. The house is too much. It's too big for you alone. We think it's time for a real solution, and we've spoken to an attorney about a conservatorship arrangement that would let us help manage things. It's for your own good. Everyone here agrees." He looked around at Karen and Robert, the way a man looks for the agreement he has already arranged. Karen nodded, but she did not lift her eyes. Robert looked at the turkey. I said, "Well, I'm glad you brought that up." I folded my hands on my knee, the way I fold them in church, the way I folded them the day we buried Gerald. "Let me get my friend." I raised my voice just enough to carry down the hall to the steady. Not a shout. I have never had to shout. Just enough. "Leonard?" The door at the end of the hall opened. Leonard Marsh walked into the dining room in his good suit, carrying the gray folder. The whole table turned. Diane's smile did not fall all at once. It went in stages, the way frost comes off a window. He set the folder on the table near the centerpiece, the little ceramic pilgrim my mother had given me in 1976, the one with the chipped hat that I put out every year, and he opened it without hurrying. He said, "Good evening, everyone. I'll keep this brief." He did not look at Michael when he said it. He looked at the folder, and then he looked at me. And then he began. He read the key provisions in the order they appeared. The updated will, executed April 14th, 2025. The quitclaim deed, recorded with the Lynn County Clerk on April 17th, 2025. The life estate reserved in my name, which meant I was entitled to remain in the property for the duration of my life, and that no conservatorship over the real property could be initiated because the property had already been legally transferred to the remainder beneficiary, Tyler, as of that April recording. Any attempt to petition a court for control of the property would find no property to control. It had already moved. He read it plainly, without drama, one clause at a time, the way you read a list of figures that have already been checked twice. He looked up. "The house is indeed large," he said, "and it remains exactly that. Yours, Margaret, for as long as you choose." He closed the folder. The little click of it was the loudest sound in the room. Michael said nothing. Diane said nothing. The turkey sat in the center of the table, and the gravy was getting cold in the good gravy boat. And the candles Diane had lit kept burning, and nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. I sat on my wooden stool at the foot of the table I built, and I looked at all of them, and I was not invisible anymore. Remember that routine paperwork I mentioned at the beginning? That was it. The conservatorship hearing Michael had scheduled for Monday, November 29th, 2 days after Thanksgiving, was canceled. Leonard's office called their attorney in Des Moines on Friday morning. There was nothing to petition for. The deed was public record. It had been public record for 7 months, sitting in plain view at the county clerk's office the whole time they were making their plans in closed rooms. In the days after Thanksgiving, the phone calls started. Diane had called Karen, and Karen had told Linda, and Linda had apparently told 3 other people, and the story, the way these things go, did not travel in the direction Diane had intended. The neighbors who had known me for 20 and 30 years, who had watched me carry groceries up that drive and shovel that walk alone every winter, heard a version of events that left Diane and Michael explaining themselves, rather than explaining me. There is a kind of justice that needs no courtroom. It travels over backyard fences and through grocery aisles, and it is very slow and very sure. By December, Michael's car had stopped appearing in my driveway. Diane stopped calling. Tyler came on Thursday, as usual. He knocked on the back door, the way he always has. He brought coffee cake from the bakery on First Street, still warm in the box. He did not mention the dinner. We sat in the sunroom with the cold pressing on the windows, and I told him about the maple, how Gerald had driven all the way to the nursery in Waterloo to find one that was already 4 feet tall, because I did not want to wait for a sapling, because I wanted shade in my own lifetime. Tyler laughed. He said that sounded exactly like me. I suppose it does. I have never been a woman who waits for the sapling. Little Emma had been in the living room during the whole dinner, watching a movie, completely unaware that anything had happened, that anything had been won or lost a few feet away from her. She came in at some point to hug my knee and ask if I had made the pecan pie yet. I told her I had. She said, "Good, you make the best one." Then she went back to her movie, and the matter was closed as far as she was concerned. And I have thought since that she had the truest measure of the whole evening of anyone at that table. She was right, by the way. I do make the best pecan pie. In February, Michael called. He said he wanted to talk. There was something careful in his voice, something I had not heard from him in a long time. I told him he was welcome in this house. I told him there would always be a chair for him at my table, a real one, not a stool. But I told him clearly, what happens to this house is my decision, and it will stay that way for as long as I am here to make it. He did not argue. He said he understood. I do not know yet if he does. Understanding is not a thing you can read off a person's voice over a telephone. It is a thing you watch for over years. I have time. I have always been patient. Every night I walk to the back door. I check the lock. I check the window latch above the kitchen sink. I check the side door in the mudroom. Then I go to bed. I have done it every night since 1984. 41 years. The locks are the same. My hands are older, but they know the way. I built this house so my family would have a place in the world. What I learned, what I had to learn at 75, standing in the doorway of my own dining room with no place set for me at my own table, is that I needed to make sure I had one too. You can spend 41 years making room for everyone else and forget to keep a seat for yourself. And the people you made room for will not always notice the empty chair. Sometimes they will set the table around it. Being old does not make you invisible. Being old does not make you incapable. And it certainly does not transfer the deed. I had kept every receipt for 41 years. I had written every number down twice until they agreed with each other. I had checked the locks every single night since the year my son was born. I was paying attention. I was always paying attention. That is the thing they never counted on. That the quiet woman at the foot of the table, the one they thought did not understand what it means, had understood it all along and had simply chosen when to say so. Real love walks through the door and knocks first. It sits with you in the sunroom and asks about the maple tree. It drinks its coffee cold because it forgot to drink it, listening to you. It never once asks what the house is worth. If you have a family member who made you feel like a burden in your own life, or if you have been the one who showed up and knocked, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your story. I read every one of them.